Just making a short break to let you know that I'm offering my last masterclass of the year on November the 8th, and it's for free. It's called 5-Step Process to Create a Portfolio-Worthy Lettering Piece that attracts your dream clients, even if you're just starting. This training will be broadcasted live from my studio in Berlin, and during the live session, I will share with you my framework to create a professional-looking lettering piece that will help you attract dream assignments. This training is really important because once you create that first portfolio lettering piece that you're really proud of, everything changes. You build self-confidence, your peers start recognizing your work, and your dream clients start noticing you. Go to martinaflor.com/masterclass to join for free. I hope to see you there. Now, back to the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Open Studio. I'm your host, Martina Flor, and in this show I have honest conversations with artists, designers, and creatives to uncover their story and the specific tactics they use to build a successful career around their skills and the work they love doing. This is a special in-between episodes which serves as a recap of the episodes from the last month. It features a short clip of each conversation in one place so that you can jump around and get a feel for both the episode and the guest. And then you can always dig deeper by going into one of those episodes. For the full list of the guests featured today, see the episode description below, right below where you press play in your podcast app. Or as usual, you can head to martinaflor.com/podcast and find all the details there. Please enjoy.
Episode 66, Karan Singh, The Importance of Authenticity, Being a Self-Taught Artist, Imposter Syndrome, The Power of Persistence, Failing and Succeeding, and Epiphanies.
I want to go back to something that you said, that you mentioned, when I look at your work, I can totally see what you're talking about. That is this simplicity, this, kind of simple shapes and lines that come together and colors, right? So, and you mentioned that there was a seminal moment where people felt really compelled by this kind of imagery. And it's still going on, I think, right? And I wonder if this is something that you pursued on purpose, or this is something that just happened. You were more drawn to create this kind of artwork, and, there was a market for it, and suddenly both things met.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think for me, I think I can only call it a seminal moment in hindsight. Only when I look back, I'm like, oh, actually, that was really good timing between what I was making and what became sort of in vogue, I guess, for lack of a better description. But for me, a lot of that work came from a want to simplify, and I think a want to reduce my work. I think for me, whenever I feel a bit lost or confused or directionless, I've just found the best thing to do is simplify and to reduce, because then you can concentrate on the few ingredients. And I think that, when I first started working with pattern and, these reduced color palettes, that I could really focus on the composition and the color scheme and the elements within it. And I think prior to that, I was so focused on this kind of antiquated idea of the longer that you spend on a piece, the better it is, or the more detailed that something is, the better it is, which, to be honest, isn't like a mentality that was compatible with me. I can kind of be impatient, and I can't spend a long amount of time on work. So I found that I just needed to kind of create work that suited my personality a little bit more, and that was more a case of like, okay, well, you're impatient and you like simple colors and don't necessarily have the interest in like hyper realism and details. So for me, it was just all about, funny, quirky ideas and conveying them in really bold and simple ways. And, going back to your question about the seminal moment of that, that cross section between it getting picked up and me making it, it was more a kind of, the seminal part of that moment was that I had started making the work that reflected me the most. And that's what felt seminal about it. It's that I wasn't trying to pretend to, mimic some of my heroes as much. It was more that I had tried to represent myself and my personality in a visual style. And I think that's sort of where things started to pick up.
That's interesting because, one would say that the more I work, the more I put effort into creating my art or my artwork, the more value it has, right? And in your case, it was sort of the opposite when you started simplifying the kind of work you were doing and perhaps even spending less time at creating each one of the artworks.
Well,
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that's like it's twofold, because it meant I could make more work. It meant that like I would finish work quickly.
Yeah.
But it didn't mean that I would make less. If anything, I made much more work back then, because I think I just got addicted to both the process and then also the satisfaction of completing something. So to a certain degree, it was like, instead of spending 3 weeks on one piece, I would spend 3 weeks on 30 pieces.
That's great,
and
yeah.
they would be much simpler. But I would also, I think this is the other thing, is like drawing a line under a piece or image or whatever is really good, because it adds a conclusion or finality to a piece. It allows you to say, okay, that's done, I move on. What did I learn from that experience? And how can I iterate? How can I make it better in the next one? And I think by adapting to that style of working, it really just helped me, I guess, just be, just develop the style a bit quicker, rather than obsess over the kind of minutia involved there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of defining or finding your style through having a lot of output, right? And kind of finishing up pieces so that you can learn from that and move on to the next one and do it better, right? So I want to move on to, like, how do you, perhaps you can recall a story of how did you gain some of those clients, or how did you got some of those stream assignments that you can see on your website, and you can pick up on any of those. But I'm curious about the background, like the backstage of that. How did you get from getting that assignment to sitting at your desk, drawing in your computer, and kind of
That's a great question. Again, I think it's definitely a snowball effect, because I returned to freelance, I would say. So I had like 2 phases of freelance. One was not very successful at all. And then kind of after working at a kind of agency, that it kind of my understanding of work became better, and I guess I had a bit more of a visual style by then, that I was a bit more prepared to go to freelance. I think that second phase of freelance is definitely where the balance definitely reached a tipping point, where my freelance started to interfere with my studio job, and I realized, okay, well, this is a good place to be in. I can safely kind of make that jump between those two worlds. But there were definitely projects that came along during that period that said, hey, maybe this could happen. So it was a really, really simple, I want to say really simple, but I'm not trying to play it down. It was for Adobe, but it was a really cool project for a campaign they were doing a really long time ago. And I still wish I knew how they found me, but I think that was like deep in my phase of like reduction and working with pattern. And I would speculate that maybe it was also in the early days of Instagram. So I had started posting my work on Instagram. It's funny because I used to be like such an Instagram purist. I'm like, no, only post photos on Instagram. And then eventually I was like, screw it, I'm just going to start posting images, illustrations on Instagram. And I think I was also there at a point where, it was still a relatively new medium platform that illustrators weren't necessarily on as much. And I think, a couple of things happened at that time. I was sharing my work on Behance quite a lot. I was sharing my work on Instagram quite a lot. And Instagram was also trying to facilitate, a creative community. So I remember getting featured by Instagram, and that sort of boosted my followers up. And I got a lot of followers back in 2000 and I want to say 15 or whatever, 14. And I think also at the same time I'd started working with GIFs. So I was posting on Tumblr a lot. And I got featured on Tumblr as well on their radar, which is like, that thing that everybody sees. And so it was just, again, this idea of, I guess, I was making, my output was really high and I was sharing my work often and I was sharing it on a variety of mediums. So, I would maybe predict that probably Behance is where Adobe, found my work. And then through Adobe, then it was like another project for ASICs. And then I think, the kind of precursor is definitely that one of the Adobe projects where, then it got featured on Behance. And then there was another project which was for Sagmeister and Walsh, which really kind of brought my pattern work into the foray and exposed everyone to this, or rather it brought that work to a broader audience. And then, it just sort of started ballooning even more as I just continually, perpetually shared my work on as many mediums and platforms as possible and interacted with people as well. Tried to kind of, people whose work I admired, I used to tell them I liked their work and just build kind of friendships as well. But sort of haven't really answered your question in so many ways. I think it's a weird kind of thing to pinpoint, but even to this day, I got to do the Academy Awards last year, which was unreal for me because somehow every year I still, I'll get an amazing project in and I'll be like, oh, this is it. I'm done. I'm over. Like I've reached everything. Like, so for me, at the point where I got the first job for Adobe, I was like, oh, dream come true. And then, Sagmeister and Walsh will, this amazingly famous studio. And I was like, oh, this is it. And then, you just keep going up this ladder. And then, I got the Oscars email and I have this little subfolder in my emails, which is just called like all-time favorite emails. And I think I keep that and I just kind of log the like really special ones where, people who are really nice to you or just you want to kind of capture a specific email. And definitely the Oscars one was like one that went straight in there where they were like, hey, do you want to like work with us? And I was like, oh God, I don't really know how I can go much. I don't know where this could go from here, but it's just snowballed.
Episode 67, Petra Eriksson, the path to finding your call, pushing the introvert inside you, client outreach, doing good work and being a professional.
You had a few back and forth and trying to figure out whether that was architecture or acrylic painting or illustration. And I find it really interesting what you say about that working for working or doing commercial illustration sort of brought some structure to you, right? Because initially you had this idea of doing art or acrylic painting, which sounds like more in the line of fine art. But of course, when you work as an illustrator for clients, then you have that structure. You have the deadlines, you have the briefings, you have some sort of boundaries that, define a little bit the framework. And of course, you can create personal work, but you always have that structure around, which is really interesting. I never thought of commercial illustration as something that can actually give a framework to your creative work.
And I feel like this is something that I've been thinking quite a lot about during these years of working as an illustrator, that for me, obviously not every client project, but overall I feel like I have learned so much from these client projects as well. Sometimes just having that structure of having to create within certain limits, which I like to play with sometimes in my personal work as well, but obviously it's a lot clearer when the structure is set by someone else. And also just sometimes being pushed a little bit more than I would push myself into testing something new. And sometimes it doesn't work, obviously, and then it can be a little bit frustrating. But then it's also really nice when a client, pushes you a little bit and it ends up being something that feels really good and that I then later continue exploring with in my personal work maybe, or so I feel like there's a lot of things that I do in my personal work that I take into my client work, but also the other way around.
So you finished art school, and what came after? Were you just leaping into freelancing? Were you getting a job somewhere? What was your journey
So
there?
I had a couple of months when I did like a little bit of freelancing right after I finished this like design education. And then I started to applying to jobs in different agencies in Stockholm, but I didn't really find anything. Like, it was a little bit tricky because of my kind of illustration heavy portfolio. So it took me a while to figure something that worked for me, and in the end that was for like a company based in Malta, a Swedish company that was based there working with gaming, and that was, you know, not the world where I had envisioned myself going to initially. But in the end, things worked out really well for me in that I think I came into this company, like this startup, when it was just 30 people there. Mm-hmm. So I got the chance to, you know, test a lot of things and get a lot of creative responsibility early on in a different way than I think it would have been if I would have come to like a traditional agency. And it was like really high roof when it came to ideas that I felt like I could, you know, make any kind of suggestion for projects and stuff, and people would listen, and usually we could test things out. But initially, basically, I was working on a big project where I was kind of illustrating a parallel universe, a different world with like planets and plants and these small little figures that lived in this planet that was part of this game. And
that's pretty amazing.
It was really, you know, it was a big learning curve for me and very different from everything I had done before.
Yeah, and after this, you went freelance, or it took you a couple more jobs to actually do that?
This was my only kind of creative fixed job, but I was there for about almost 3 years. Mm-hmm. Though the last year I worked less hours so that I could focus a little bit more time on my personal projects, and then I had started doing a little bit of freelance work on the side that last year. And then I was actually in Berlin for a while, because then I had escaped Malta became very small after a while. So then I escaped to Berlin for a while and then continued on to Barcelona after that.
I see. You have relocated a couple of times, so I'm going to deeper into that as well later on. So I'm going to make a note right now, and I'm going to keep that for later. But I just want to continue like the chronology of, you know, your path into freelancing. You were, you know, leaving art school, getting a job at a gaming company in Malta. You worked there for 3 years, and you slowly started making, you know, building up your portfolio and your client base on the side. What led you to become a freelancer? What was the pursuit there? Why did you say one day, hey, I just want to start building up my freelance business. What were the motivations behind it? Was it personal? Was it time? Was it autonomy? Was it doing more of the work you like doing? What was it?
It was a mix of things. It was definitely, I definitely liked this idea of the autonomy, of being more in charge of my own time and be able to choose a little bit better on like what I focused on and what I dedicated myself on doing. But then it was also the creative expression part that, like as I mentioned before, that like in this agency, like I had a great time, you know, creating things there, but it didn't really feel like my way of expressing myself. So also that to be able to just be more free and to do a bigger variety of projects as well. Like I have learned that I think I have patience in certain things in life, but I have learned that I'm not great if I need to work on the same thing for a long time. If it's like a project that stretches over several months, I find it hard to keep my interest and creative energy up enough that then I need to find other ways to kind of trick myself into keeping that kind of energy in the project. So for me, it was also a way to make it easier to have a mix of projects, to be able to jump a little bit more quicker between different things.
Episode 69, Jordan Metcalf. Turning your hobby into your job, auditing your creative career, pivoting, how artists become products, and experimenting and keeping it interesting.
You were mentioning that you had this tipping point, and you had a very supportive partner, and you wanted to pivot into something that you enjoyed doing, right?
Yeah, so, exactly. So I think, at that point, I kind of was like, hey, let me try this freelance thing. And then I was kind of like, I'm just going to go ahead and like the only stuff I'm going to put on the internet, because it was like the early days of Behance, when Behance was first starting out, which was like a wild time. And so I was kind of like, I'm just going to put this stuff online and see what happens, because this is the stuff I'd like to be doing as a job, instead of maybe some of the stuff I'd been doing for these studios and these clients, right? So it's like, and so then I put all these weird little type experiment things on, and it was just so arbitrary looking back. But I mean, I guess it was just, again, it was sort of the early days of this, so it maybe it's fine that it was just unconnected to clients or anything. But yeah, it was just, I put these little experiments online, and then because, again, I was lucky, it was just the right time with the early days of Behance. I think was, there were obviously a few of us. I think probably people like Eric were probably doing a similar thing at a similar time, like coming into this. And so it just was this kind of lucky situation of being at the right time. And so the Behance thing, I got featured a couple times, which at that point too, there were less people, so it made it more visible. And, like a week or two into, I guess, putting this stuff online, like sitting in my little house in Cape Town, and, I got emails from people from like Nike and that kind of stuff, just saying, hey, we would love to pay you to just make some graphics for Nike. Like, and at the time it was like absurd. I was like, what are you talking about?
Is this spam or?
Yeah, it's just like nothing I ever could have really predicted or imagined, would be the situation. And so I just was, again, I don't even think it was about me. It was just really just luck, and right time, right place kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think it all snowballed from there. I did some stuff for Nike, and it was really just like, their briefs were basically just like some pictures of my work plus a t-shirt and plus Nike or plus the swoosh, and it was basically just like, hey, do whatever you do, just like have fun, make some weird shit, and I mean, it's like a dream job, right? Like, especially when you're just starting out and you've never done this before. I'd never like, I didn't even know what to quote. They're like, oh, just send us a quote for what to, and I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, this is dollars. I sent some like amount to them as a quote, and the guy like immediately responds like, that's perfect. And I was like, oh, did I just like way under quote? Like, I don't know.
So how was the behind the scenes of that one first big assignment? Were you asking friends or colleagues how to do this, or were you even prepared to quote jobs? Were there really this really your first job, or the first job you were quoting? Because I can imagine that you were, you wanted to launch your freelance career as an artist or designer, and you were already like setting up the things, right? You had your website running, and you set up this
I don't think I had a
Behance.
website.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have a website. I had a Behance.
Were you doing client outreach, or like connecting with some people and saying,
no,
hey? Okay,
dude, I knew nothing, and there was no social media, so I didn't have like Instagram. I think like Facebook had like just come out like a year before in South Africa. It was just like really.
It makes you sound really old.
I'm very, very old. But no, I didn't know any better, and I think also just being in Cape Town again, like I didn't have a huge network of people that I could just reach out to and be like, hey, cool, what do I do about this and this and this? A lot of it was just figuring it out as I went. And so I think before the Nike job, I'd done like one other international job for some like Belgian magazine who wanted, I forget what it's called, but like stereoscopic maybe. They wanted some typography that was done in that thing where you wear the little blue and red glasses, and then it had dimensionality.
Yes.
So anyway, I think that was the only other thing I'd done. But no, a lot of it was just figuring it out. And I think, I think kind of honestly these clients like probably knew where I was coming from too. I think they just knew I was like some freelance dude in the middle of nowhere. And so they weren't exactly like expecting some extreme professionality probably. But I mean, I think I approached the jobs professionally. Just I think they probably thought it was funny that I was maybe trying to look professional with my quotes or invoices or whatever, versus like maybe being the system they would be normally have. But I guess, I don't know, just to not talk about this for like an hour, I think what happened then is just created this snowball of getting that work seen, having the Nike swoosh on your portfolio at that time. I mean, still today, it's like they're such like a big desirable client to have, so I think having that just led to more of that. And so, like, I think just the lettering career almost just happened to me because I think like a lot of other people, it just was the zeitgeist of people getting interested in lettering as illustration, and maybe like the tools becoming, I don't know, maybe the tools lending themselves to like being useful for drawing letters. I don't know what it was exactly, but obviously there's like a few people who are probably around my age or came in those earlier days of this that were doing this in different places, like Alex Richet and Jessica Hish and all these people who have probably been around for a similar amount of time or maybe even longer, I don't know, but so I think it just happened at this great time, and there was such like an early enthusiasm for it. Everyone is like excited about crazy typography, and so it was just this really fun thing, and I think getting paid to experiment was just really validating too, in terms of being like, hey, I can do this, I can do different things, and people will see it and recognize it as still something cohesive to me, as opposed to like having to have some defined style that's like always looks like this for people to know who I am. And so I was really excited about it.
I think that, I mean, it doesn't always happen that suddenly after 2 weeks of setting up your freelance practice, you get an assignment from Nike. But there's definitely, and this is not something that I would say, I would recommend everyone starting new to just aim for, right? But there's definitely something that you were still putting out there in terms of like you were trying to put your work out there. You were finding new ways, which at the time where Behance was the new way of putting work out there, right? It was in a way innovative, and kind of new. And it just brings me back to what you said in the very beginning, this thing of like, try to get the most eyes on the work that you're doing, and keep on having interest in what you're doing and keep it experimental for yourself. And you were actually putting those bits of experimentation with typography out there in novel ways or in new ways, right? So this is it. I hope you loved this episode. You can find me, the host of the show, on social networks at Martina Flor on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you have a question or comments, go to martinaflor.com/podcast, where you can see previous episodes, find show notes, and send voice memos with your comments and questions. You can also watch these episodes on YouTube. Just go to martinaflor.com/YouTube to find them. You can, of course, listen to all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform. If you loved this episode, subscribe to this podcast. And if you leave us a review, it will help others find us. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next episode of Martina Flor's Open Studio. Bye-bye.